Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2. XCC, hello and welcome. XCC, hello and welcome.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
She sells seashells by the seashore. She sells seashells by the seashore. There we go, rolling.
We didn't use a single light on the entire
Yeah,
shoot. We didn't use any lights. We had a camera and a tripod. That's it.
That's it, camera and a tripod. And that came out of a need to because we knew it was going to be just the two of us. We didn't even have anyone assisting us. We were shooting it in 4K, which made it a little bit more difficult. And basically, we just didn't want the technology to, get in the way of a story.
Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 38. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. This past week, Steph and I attended Podcast Movement 2017 over in Anaheim, California. For anyone unfamiliar with Podcast Movement, or hashtag PM17 as it quickly became referred to by the young and hip of Podcast Movement, well, it's an annual industry conference that's focused on the business of podcasting. And it consisted of 2.5 days of workshops, breakout sessions, and keynote speeches led by some of the most recognizable voices of both the podcast and radio worlds. This year was actually the 4th year in its existence, and to my understanding, it was the biggest one yet. To give you an idea, some of the bigger names that were present this year at Podcast Movement were Dan Carlin of Common Sense and Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcasts, Aaron Mahnke of Lore fame, as well as the creatives behind the wildly successful Undisclosed podcast. Now, I'd never attended Podcast Movement before, but I'd heard nothing but good things. And so when tickets first went on sale at the end of last year, the day after Thanksgiving, actually here in America to be exact, I immediately purchased them because I'd heard such great things, and I really wanted to kind of broaden my knowledge and meet other people involved in podcasting. Since purchasing them back in late November of last year, I've been pretty eager to see what all the fuss was about, and now I know because it was pretty awesome. Even if I hadn't learned a ton by the many industry people that were present or been inspired by other successful podcasters out there telling their stories and making a difference in people's lives, or, had gotten the chance to hear people like the people that I mentioned earlier, if I hadn't had the chance to hear the great talks that they gave, even if not for these things, I think that I can safely say, and I think I can speak for Steph on this as well, that just being around other like-minded people doing similar things, such as myself, being around podcasters, which for now, it's not exactly a daily occurrence. Hell, it's not even a monthly occurrence for me. Being around my people, yes, I did just apparently refer to other podcasters as my people. Well, it was really great, and it was inspiring, and it was informative. And I now no longer feel on my own doing this thing that I love. I no longer feel like I don't have support, or that people don't understand what in the hell this whole podcasting thing is about, or what podcasting is to begin with. You have to remember that while all of you guys obviously you're well acquainted with podcasting, it's still a relatively new thing for a lot of other people. So half the time when I'm explaining to someone what the documentary life is, I also have to explain what podcasting is to them. Obviously this is rapidly changing with the success of shows like, the earlier mentioned Undisclosed or Serial, that was a big one, or again, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. But for now, podcasting, it somehow still feels pretty, very much in its infancy. Now, if anything that I've just said rings true to any of you, well, it rang true to me too, and there's a good reason. A number of times this week, I found myself thinking and pondering about the parallels between podcasters and documentary filmmakers. Like the feelings that I just described to you about being around other like-minded individuals and basking in the love and support and feeling not alone when we're in this, eternal struggle for money for our films, or we're working 3 part-time jobs just to be able to keep the lights on. And I do mean both house lights as well as set lights. Or constantly having to explain to people why we do what we do day in and day out for the love and the passion that we have for documentary films. So I thought a lot about this show. I revisited why I even started doing the documentary life at this point about 15 months ago. And I realized that while things certainly have evolved over this time period, and most of you already know this, right? The format change that occurred a couple of months ago, my ability to string more than a few sentences together, the size of our listenership. One thing that is exactly the same as it was the day that I started this show is the why I do this show, which is I do this show today like I did over a year ago because I believe that there is a need for the kind of inspiration, information, and networking that this show strives to bring you week in and week out. I know in my heart of hearts that there is a community of like-minded documentary filmmakers out there in the world who are finding this show a pretty useful tool to making their own documentary films, to making those films come to fruition, and for making their documentary lives a very real thing. I have not doubted this since day one, since the day we began this journey, and I feel even stronger about it now. So as we move forth with today's program, I want us all to be thinking of the thousands of other people out there that are listening to this show, probably right now, probably at the same time that you're listening to it. The many other documentary filmmakers out there, just like you and me, who have the same struggles as you and I, who also benefit by tuning in religiously each and every week in hopes of hearing, some little tidbit or two of valuable content that speaks to them. And for feeling not alone as they make their sometimes scary way in this world that we all call our documentary lives. I am honored to be continuing on this journey with you. My name is Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is The Documentary Life. When we come back from the break, I'm going to give you 5 reasons for studying documentary filmmaking. And in our Doc Industry guest segment, we'll have a candid conversation with 2 Australian filmmakers who one day, they made the very calculated and conscious decision to make documentary films for a living. Their current film, Barbecue, it takes a look at the age-old tradition of cooking meat by fire, as seen through the lens of citizens the world over. I need a favor. I need a favor from you. And I'm going to ask you something that I don't think I've asked of you for well over a year at this point. I need you to go to iTunes right now and give this show a 5-star rating and maybe even write a few words for a quick review. When I first started doing the podcast, I was asking you this on a regular basis, but I haven't for a while. So I'm asking you now because I'd like to see this podcast get out to more people. That can happen if the documentary life comes up in more iTunes searches. Now, in order for this to occur, iTunes needs to see more activity in its ratings and reviews section. The more ratings and reviews a show gets, the more it will come up in searches. So when people are searching for documentary film podcasts, for instance, we're far more likely to come up in their searches if iTunes is seeing more of this activity, the ratings and reviews that I'm referring to. This show is a passion of mine, right? So please help me keep growing this documentary community of ours. So if the documentary life has benefited you in any way, please just take a moment right now, head to iTunes, find the Documentary Life podcast, and look for the ratings and reviews tab. And then from there, just leave a 5-star rating and review. I can promise you that every single one of these ratings and reviews, it gives it a little bump in the iTunes popularity rating, which thereby it increases the visibility of this show. Now, if you have any trouble finding the ratings and reviews area, I've added a direct link to it in the show notes for this episode. In advance, thank you for helping me to continue spreading the documentary life love. Seriously, thank you for your rating and review. So today, I'd like to give you 5 reasons for studying documentary filmmaking. It's important that you know that this is not my way of saying you should go to film school. That's not what this is about at all. I didn't go to film school. Most doc filmmakers that I know didn't go to film school. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It certainly has its merits, and we've talked about it on the show before. In fact, we had recent guests, Brian Kimmel or John Manning, both successful filmmakers, doc filmmakers and commercial filmmakers who went to film school. But a formal education isn't really what I'm specifically talking about here. There are many, many ways in which one can study documentary filmmaking. It could be watching more documentary films. It can be going to one-off seminars held by your local film group, or maybe a bigger event which is held by a documentary film organization, in your community. Listening to this podcast, right? That's something, or any of the other filmmaking podcasts that are out there. It provides a form of education, as does reading any of the zillions of books that are out there. So I'm going to list out for you what I think are 5 damn good reasons why we should all be constantly and pretty consistently studying documentary filmmaking. The first reason I would say, and we'll just call this number 1, and this is in no particular order. Number 1, so that someone else will want to see your film, and maybe more importantly, pay to see it. What's that? You don't care if someone actually sees your film? You don't need to make any money on it? Well, then you've probably turned into the wrong show, friend. Look, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just trying to be realistic here. If you're telling me that you don't give a rat's behind, whether or not you make a cent or shilling or whatever from your film, well, then I'll bet that you're between the ages of 18 to 22. You're attending school, but not as a film student, probably in fine arts or English lit, and you have longer hair and you listen to the Smiths. Do not take offense by my generalization here. I just basically described myself when I was 20 years old, and I quote unquote just wanted to be an artist. Well, you should see those films that I did during that time. Well, actually, then it would have been videos for sure. Actually, you shouldn't, and you never will if I have anything to say about it, because they're pretty unwatchable. And oh, by the way, I spent the next decade as a starving artist trying to stay true to my art. My point in all of this, if you want to make documentary films, most likely you're not actively trying to not make money. You're not actively only trying to eat ramen as your diet and living in a shoebox for an apartment. The struggle isn't really that great, though it certainly can inspire some of your work, but that's something else. No, I'm guessing that most of the people that are tuning into this show have moved beyond the insecure, entirely unfounded, and in my opinion, entirely unhelpful starving artist routine, and want to make films that will be seen by others. And in order to do that, you need to have some money for your film. And you need to have some money so as not to be eating ramen all of the time. It's not pretty, people, and it's not healthy. And for the record, Morrissey would probably laugh in your face if you told him you didn't want to make money because money would, negatively impact your otherwise fine art. Look, anyone can make a film that's only going to be seen by you and your Susie and the Banshees loving girlfriend. Anyone can make a film and put it up on video or YouTube. But not everyone can make a film that gets into a festival or gets picked up for distribution and perhaps, hopefully seen by loads of people. That takes some talent and it takes some knowledge. So surrounding yourself with people who make films for a living, attending film festivals, consulting with someone about making your film, i.e. getting your butt educated, that's only going to give you a greater chance at making a film that will actually be seen by somebody. And I don't know about you guys, but I want my films to be seen. It took me about 10 years, maybe longer, to learn that lesson or to really fully appreciate that. And if my words can help you skip those 10 years, it will have been well worth it. Number 2, it's well worth the investment in yourself and your film. Wouldn't it be worth it to take a few weekend seminars in order to better yourself as a documentary filmmaker? Think about it. Yoga instructors, tax accountants, real estate agents, body workers, that they all consistently take courses or retreats or seminars in order to up their game. It just makes sense that as a filmmaker, you do the same. You already heard me mention earlier that you know that I attended a big podcast conference last week, right? Why? Because I want to increase the level of quality of my own podcast. As a documentary filmmaker, I'm constantly scouring film message boards, sharing interesting articles with other colleagues and having them share them with me. I'm reading all kinds of filmmaking books. I listen to other filmmaking podcasts, all really in an effort to up my own documentary filmmaking game. As we all already know, filmmaking isn't exactly an inexpensive endeavor. Well, certainly better than in years past, but it's pretty costly. And mistakes can be costly. And trust me, take it from someone who knows it's easy to make film mistakes without even actually knowing you're doing it. And by the time you get to post-production, there may be no amount of editing that's really going to be able to make much from the mess that you've already created. So broadening your knowledge of the filmmaking craft, it can help save you some needless wastes of time and money. Number 3, to not feel alone. And I mentioned this earlier, this idea of not feeling alone, right? I felt it by attending podcasts. I gained greatly just by being around other people that were doing what I was doing. In documentary filmmaking, it's certainly no different. One of the initial reasons that I had for doing the documentary life was because I could see that there was a need to connect other documentary filmmakers with one another. That unlike commercial filmmaking or commercial filmmakers, the doc community seemed to be a bit less connected. Doc filmmakers, we tend to think that we can go it alone, that we can just take our camera and lav mic and make our films. It's actually kind of endemic in the culture of documentary filmmaking, this idea of doc filmmakers thinking they can go it alone, which of course you can in a way, but man, not only might it take you 15 years to get your film done, but you might end up breaking the bank or your marriage in the process. Don't do that. Don't do that. It's not necessary. Or it's highly unnecessary, in my opinion. We doc filmmakers, we need to stay connected. We need to feel a part of a greater community. I'm telling you, just knowing that there are others like us out there fighting the good fights and facing the struggles that we doc filmmakers always do, it can be a very, very helpful thing knowing that other people are also experiencing that. Hell, that's why you're doing this right this second, listening to me prattle on about documentary filmmaking on this here podcast. And the thing is, in the process of getting out there and meeting other doc filmmakers or attending, documentary workshops or paying to consult with someone, again, we're feeling less alone. And feeling less alone, it gives us a better chance to blossom creatively. Knowing that you don't have to do everything on your own, it can be a huge and oftentimes a pretty surprising relief to those of us who have been doing our doc projects, on our own for such a long time. Number 4 is a musician needs to study music. And what do I mean by that? Recently, and don't laugh at this, I've been considering taking up the piano. It's an instrument that I'd kind of wish that I'd learned later on in life here at this point. So much of the root of any piece comes from a piano, right? I don't really know if I'll actually really attempt to learn to play the piano, but if I do you imagine that the first thing I'd do is I don't know, buy a really nice Steinway and just start constructing some classical compositions, to be used as maybe scoring for my next great film? No, probably not. The first thing that I'm most likely going to do is run a Google search, right, for instructors, say within a 15-mile radius of myself, who specialize in training beginner piano players. And then I'll just take it from there. How does that relate to documentary filmmaking? Well, these days you can probably buy a decent camera for a relatively inexpensive price. Get a light or two, a shotgun mic, and you can just start filming, right? You can do that. And I would never tell you not to. I want you out there in the world practicing and learning your passion as much as you can. But I might recommend making your life a little easier by at least watching a few, how-to YouTube videos, if nothing else. That'll at least help you avoid I don't know, getting the wrong speed of SD card, or pointing your shotgun mic in the wrong direction, or say ruining your camera by naively going from a hot and humid environment into a much cooler room without allowing your camera the proper time to acclimatize. I've done that, and it did ruin my camera. Not to mention telling a decent story. I've met many a filmmaker who simply think that by owning the latest and greatest drones and red cameras, that inherently they were made to make great films. And then I watch their work and I wonder how on earth they thought shooting, these really cool slow motion shots of people in bathing suits doing backflips from, off of cliffs into beautiful lagoons into Thailand, how they thought they were making a compelling story by these images. Or why going from head to talking head doesn't often make for a very moving documentary film. Just as learning from a professional pianist how to play the piano can help you someday play a song up on a stage, learning from a professional filmmaker how to make a proper film can help you get your film up on the screen. Last but not least, number 5, other people have great ideas too. I know, you've got killer ideas that no one else has ever thought of, and you've got this unique style of filmmaking that's entirely your own. It's unlike any other. That's great. And I believe you. But I also know that the reality is that 99.9% of what we are and what we create, it comes from others who have come before us. We don't create our films in a vacuum. We are completely subject to influences, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise. It reminds me of an article I once read. It was an interview with the lead singer of R.E.M., Michael Stipe. The interviewer asked him how he was influenced by the Beatles. And Stipe basically said he was completely uninfluenced by anything Beatlesque, which to me is like saying that genetics have no bearing on our mental or physical health. I mean, come on. It's the Beatles. Anyhow, look, I'm not suggesting that you should copy or steal someone else's film idea or style, though I suppose that Tarantino got away with it, but that's another story. You do need to be aware of your influences and aware of how you use them. It's probably not a great idea to make some slightly obscure doc about changing weather patterns in Madagascar and how it's affecting the meerkat population and narrate it with a slow and deliberate German accent. That's not going to cut it, obviously. At best, you'll be called out for your certainly, shall we say, Herzogian tendencies. At worst, you'd be laughed at for trying to emulate a god of cinema. Anyhow, I digress, as I do from time to time. My point is that we're all in some way, made up of like 1,000 different influences. So why not embrace them fully? Why not take what you like and leave behind what you don't like and fashion something that is you out of what's left? Which, by the way, is most likely going to be one big stir-fry, if you will, of filmmakers, painters, musicians, and teachers, bad TV shows, good hair days, whatever. Through studying films and their makers, we can not only better understand how cool things get made, but we can then put our own personal spins on them, thereby creating something we can all be proud of putting out into the world. So there you have it. 5 pretty good reasons, or as I mentioned earlier, hopefully 5 damn good reasons that I believe that we all should be, in some form or another, constantly studying documentary filmmaking. It's now time for the Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week. The Doc Lifer Community Question of the Week is brought to you by DesktopDocumentaries.com, proud creators of the Documentary Scriptwriting Masterclass, an exciting new course by Academy Award nominee Daniel Rame that basically demystifies the scriptwriting process for your whole documentary film. So the email comes from a Robert in Atlanta, Georgia, and it reads, "Hi, Chris. First off, I have been a loyal listener to your show for the past year. I have listened to them all and eagerly await each episode that comes out. And I can say that I am also very happy with your new weekly format. More episodes for me to enjoy. I write you also because I am wondering if you might know any doc filmmakers planning post-Harvey work in Houston. I've been encouraged to seek out a grant for emergency response ethnography on it, following on from my thesis topic, and the idea came up to include a documentary component, which I've been considering adding to my anthropology work anyway. Thank you, Robert." Well, thank you very much for the email, Robert. Anyone in the States probably already knows what Robert's referring to here, but those around the world who don't know, the southern part of Texas this past week, including the city of Houston, it's recently been enveloped in one of the worst storms called Hurricane Harvey, and now flooding in the history of Texas. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced from their homes. In fact, just before I started recording this, I was reading an article about how all 12,000 members of the National Guard in Texas have been deployed in the area. So the images that I've seen, they harken back to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Pretty horrifying stuff. In any case, Robert's basically asking if anyone will be planning on doing some documentary film work in Houston soon after the events maybe die down. I can only assume that the answer is yes, but I don't know anyone personally myself at the moment who is. So I'm asking you, Doc Lifers, are any of you planning on doing any film work there? Are there any Doc Lifers in Texas, perhaps, or certainly outside of Texas as well? If so, please email me, and I can put you in touch with Robert if this is something that you're interested in. I don't know about any budget or anything like that, but maybe from the sounds of Robert's email, maybe he's going to include some kind of line item within his grant application. Honestly, I don't really know about that. But again, like I said, I can put you in touch with Robert. The best way would be for you to email me at chris@barongfilms.com. That's CHRIS at BARANGFILMS.com. So please feel free to write me about this if you're looking to do some filming in Texas after the flooding has subsided. It seems like a nice opportunity, so I thought I'd put this one out there for you guys. If you yourself have a comment, question, or suggestion for the show, again, you can email me at chris@barongfilms.com, and you too could be the next Doc Lifer community question of the week. When we come back from a quick break, we will be talking with Matthew Salleh and Rose Tucker, who are two documentary filmmakers from the land down under, who've just released a wonderful film that's entitled Barbecue. Believe me, this is going to be one fiery and delicious conversation. So you've got a great idea for a documentary film. Awesome. I'd love to hear about it, but I don't have a ton of time. Can you tell me about it in 30 seconds or less? Oh, you don't quite have your pitch down yet. Okay, that's fine. What's your website where I can find more information? Maybe a press kit I can take a look at. You don't have one. Well, have you thought about how you might raise some funds to help with the costs of making films? They can be expensive, right? You haven't. Okay, maybe just tell me about your audience. Who's going to want to see your film? Who will you be marketing it to? You don't know this either. Okay, then I'm going to assume you haven't thought about how you'll be getting your film out into the world then, right? I think I see what's going on here. I was once in your shoes. A great idea for a doc. Camera in one hand, a boom mic in the other. But other than that, not much other than a whole lot of excitement and gumption. And that's great. You'll need all of that. But you'll also need a heck of a lot more if you're looking to make the kind of documentary film that you can be proud of. The kind that people will want to see and will impact them. The kind that won't break the bank while you're making it. And dare I say, you might even make some money from. You need support, and we've got you covered. We built the Documentary Academy with you in mind. We've got all the resources you need to make a successful documentary film you can be proud of. Come and enroll at thedocumentarylife.com/academy, and let's turn that doc idea into a reality. I'm excited to have you guys on the show today, Matthew Salleh and Rose Tucker. Welcome to the Documentary Life. Let's get this thing started, shall we?
Sounds good.
A big focus of what we'll talk about, obviously, is going to be about your film, Barbecue, which has recently been released, the feature-length documentary Barbecue. I'm excited to talk about it. Before we do get into that, it would be helpful for myself and for my listeners to understand a little bit about where Matthew Salleh and Rose Tucker, where you guys come from and what you're all about and what brought you to documentary filmmaking, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're originally from Adelaide, Australia, where we've been running our production company for just over 11 years now. And we started the way a lot of people do, just by making our own short films, that kind of thing, and then started to realize, we need to make a business out of this, and started doing a lot of commercial work, corporate videos and things like that. And then we moved into doing TV commercials and that kind of thing. And that was what our business was. It was primarily a commercial production company.
Right.
And then about 5 years ago, we made a short documentary, our first short documentary, which we shot in Argentina. And that's where we hit our stride. We discovered, like, this is our passion. This is what we're really good at. And for the next few years, we made a series of short documentaries, and those did quite well in film festivals and the like. So they did the festival rounds, and we got to sort of hone our skills, really find our style. And then we thought, let's have a crack at making our first feature. So in Australia, we're very lucky in that there's funding available from the government.
Right.
So we went for it, applied for it. The funding body had been keeping an eye on us, looking at our short films and things like that. So they were quite excited for us to submit for this particular grant. And we did it, and we got shortlisted, and then we got it, and we're like, oh boy, now we have to travel the world and film in 12 countries. Oh boy, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Right. Well, and you and I, we run some pretty similar paths, and that the way that we do kind of function our documentary lives is that we're doing the commercial and the corporate work to sort of support our passion work. And not unlike you, Matthew, and Rose, my wife, Steph, and I, we are now really sort of, not that we're by any means turning away from sort of the commercial and corporate work, but we really are focusing more on the documentary work in a way that's really how we want to try to create our livings now solely at some point. And so that's very much sort of the goal at hand. And it seems a bit like that's how you guys are functioning now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, the balance was, I think you really have to find a way to actually enjoy the commercial work. It's very easy for filmmakers to say, I don't want to do commercial work. I'm actually a brilliant filmmaker. That's not.
I'm an artist.
Yeah, but I enjoy making. I enjoy making stuff more than I enjoy being a filmmaker. If that makes sense. I enjoy, like Rosie and I we're like most people, we're just a crew of two when we're out in the field, so we need to constantly hone our skills. It was funny, just before we set off on making this film, we got hired to reshoot all the stock footage for our local tourism board. So people clinking wine glasses and having a great old time. And normally you'd hire a crew, like it was pretty they wanted very stylish footage, and normally you'd hire 10 or 12 people to have in your crew, and a bunch of professional actors and makeup artists, and we just got a bunch of our friends and shot it with just the two of us.
Fantastic.
So we could absolutely simulate what it would be like being out in the field. And so we would literally be like lugging our equipment in backpacks through the wineries as practice for when we sort of went into the middle of the Middle East. So for me, commercial work is a great way to get your flight hours up, as it were, and just constantly shoot, constantly edit, and it's funny because once you actually with this being our first feature, you actually end up ironically shooting a lot less, because you have to spend about a year marketing the film, and you have to do a lot more pre-production, all that. So I've always found that commercial work is a way to sort of and make it so that when you actually do get a chance to shoot a great story, it's easy. You're not worrying about how to quickly change a lens or
post-production as well. Our post-production pipeline was so smooth because of the years of high turnaround, quick turnaround commercial work. So when it came to film, it was we had all those systems in place, and it was simple.
It's funny how they do go hand in hand. And I remember early on in my career thinking, man, I don't know if I really want to do the commercial thing. And it didn't take long for me. And I was also working with I had a mentor, and I was working with the right people who often really kind of, through observing and working with them, I realized, there's ways to not only can I be honing a ton of these skills that I'm going to be using in my films later on, but I'm sort of observing the ways in which you fashion and you tell a story, and it's all about storytelling. And so they're not, commercial and documentary can often come together, especially nowadays. Commercial work is documentary elements in commercial work is a much more accepted and cool and hip thing now.
Yeah, and that was how we sold ourselves, to be honest. That was our main style of commercial work was documentary style, so working with real people rather than actors and that kind of thing. So yeah, a lot of crossover.
Something that jumped out when I was looking a bit at your guys' background was this idea that the fact that you were creating a number of doc shorts before you got to Barbecue, the feature length, and I'm fascinated with that. Was that a very conscious decision that, look, we want to make a bunch of doc shorts, we want to practice our skills, hone our skills, so that we can then go and do this with our feature? Was that very intentional, or did you want to make documentary short films at that point?
Yeah, no, I think it was definitely the latter. I think you have to be really careful about, I'm very wary about people that do like calling card films, because it can work. That's when I'm going to make this short as like something to show the investors for the feature sort of thing. And that's great, and that's very tactical, but as long as the short film, as long as you have a passion for making the short film itself. So when we made our first short, Pablo's Villa, and I should mention a little project we had before we did our first short documentaries, we had this little online web project called Portrait Mode, where basically we would interview I think in the end we interviewed about 100 people, and we would interview them for hours and then just put up one small unedited 40-second piece of it. And then we had this
It's like Humans of New York, but video.
That's amazing.
Before Humans of New York was a thing.
And that was where we actually developed a love of just capturing people's stories, and just realizing through talking to 100 or so people that like, oh man, the stories that you guys tell are way better than anything I could write.
That we can construct, right?
We went from that, and then we would just the first documentary short we made, Pablo's Villa, which is about a town in Argentina that went underwater for like 25 years, and everyone abandoned it except this old guy Pablo. That was just made by fluke. We were literally just on holiday, sort of traveling through the area, and we had like the camera in the backpack, and we just decided to make this short doc. And we'd sort of gotten so heavy into the commercial work that we had sort of put the film dreams on hiatus for a bit. And so when it came to making this short, we were just going to pop it up on Vimeo and be done with it. And then we showed it to a bunch of friends. They said, you should just pop it in a couple of film festivals. And we're like,
quite well, right?
Yeah, and we did. I mean, we got very lucky. We and film festivals, it's all about finding people that can really help champion your work. And we world premiered at the Sydney Film Festival, which is a big Australian festival.
Fantastic.
And the programmer there, Jenny Neighbour, she found that film out of the slush pile and has now been supporting us. Has supported all of our films all the way up and through.
Yeah, she's now played 3 of our films. So she's.
Well, you have someone championing you now. That's the beauty of the film festival thing, right? And when you get connected with a director like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We now did did Pablo's Villa also play at the Melbourne International Film Festival?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yep. And that is not the same as Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, correct?
No, they're two different festivals. Yeah.
Okay.
So
the Documentary Film Festival is quite new. It's only been around last years.
2 years, right.
Yeah, that's right.
And Melbourne International Film Festival is one of those big old legacy,
classic,
I think,
right?
Running since the 50s, kind of.
Yeah.
The Australians have had very long-running film festivals in Sydney and Melbourne, mainly because it was so hard to get film prints over in the 60s and 70s.
Oh my God.
The only way they could get them was for like one screening, and then they'd have to ship them back. So festivals were a big part of Australian film culture.
Fantastic. We had a couple of months ago, we did a special on film festivals. In fact, we made a two-parter, and Lyndon Stone, who is the director of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, kind of led us through that quite as well as 3 or 4 other filmmakers, and had a fantastic time creating the show, and we learned a ton, and the show was pretty successful. And I, through Lyndon, I learned quite a bit about film in documentary film in Australia. And I shot a job in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and that's my only experience with Australia thus far. But I'm looking forward to getting there and perhaps attending, or perhaps even being in the Sydney Film Festival or Melbourne International or Melbourne Doc. I think it would be great.
Yeah,
and all three, obviously Melbourne Doc, but Melbourne International and Sydney Film Festival, they also have. There's a very strong history of
those are the biggies.
Of documentary programming, especially as well, like very, very, very astute programming out of those places, which is and so when we got when these festivals started supporting us, that was sort of a big turning point. That I guess it was almost like we were being given permission to do more work with thinking of the big screen as the sort and a big audience as the primary, as the first stop on the film, and that's what then led to. It was actually we were up at that Pablo's Villa also got into slam dance.
Yes, I saw that.
In the US, and it was after that we were we come all the way over to America because we attended it, and we were like, we got to do something, and we did a road trip afterwards, and that's when we went through Central Texas and filmed the short film Central Texas Barbecue, which, as much as I said don't do a calling card film, that film kind of ended up.
It became a calling card film.
Absolutely, that was going to be my next question. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was not shot with that intention. It was just shot as a standalone film, but it was that film that the Screen Australia, the funding body, took a real shine to, and they're like, oh, what do you got? What do I do next? And we're like, that times 12 countries, thanks.
Wow. Yeah. And did footage from Central Texas Barbecue make it into Barbecue, or did you go back to Texas and refilm?
Yeah, we went back and refilmed. Yeah. So we wanted to. We didn't want to reuse anything from the short.
And the story had changed as well. It had changed from being a standalone idea to something that had to feed into a more global story. So, we just figured, reshoot it.
Right. And tell me how the success, making the short films, getting films like Pablo's Villa, Central Texas Barbecue into Sydney and Melbourne film festivals, and now becoming a part of their programming, completely on their radar. How does that help then your funding for the bigger film?
Yeah, it was incredibly helpful, actually. We went to Jenny Neighbour, and then at Melbourne Film Festival, Thomas Caldwell. We went to those two programmers who'd been really supportive of our shorts, and we actually got them to write letters of support when we went for the funding. Obviously, they couldn't guarantee they would screen the feature, but they were saying, like, we're really interested in seeing what Matt and Rosie do next. We'll definitely consider watching this film. I think just having those two on board right back at the going for funding stage was really important.
Yeah, but I think also on top of just the tactical advantage of having people like this on site, it's like I said, there was as much like growth as a filmmaker that came out of 2 or 3 years of being on the festival circuit, because it means you're constantly engaging with audiences, and also it's very easy for filmmakers to really not like film programmers when they're not programming your film, but when you actually sort of we've been on that side. Hey. I got my list. Don't worry.
Yeah. We can share lists.
There's far more rejections than we've had acceptances. Don't worry.
But what it means is if you actually start to listen to what programmers have their finger very strongly on the pulse of what audiences like, and I think sometimes when you don't get a film into a festival, and there's such a huge number of films being entered into festivals now that it really isn't. Right. There's no fairness in any of the process. But if you can actually sit down and listen, and these guys are at the coalface of having to keep very demanding audiences constantly happy. If you actually can get into their brain and see like what they're thinking, like what's your hook, why, and also they've seen everything. So unfortunately, when you think you've got your super original idea for a movie, you actually talk to these guys and they're like, oh yeah, that's like these these 14 other films I've seen before. And then, you know, so I sort of see the film programmers as being like expert level film watchers that understand audience well. And so actually talking to them gave us a really good sense of, oh, actually, this is what audiences are looking for. This is how you can engage with them. So it was not just the tactical help. It was a lot of other stuff in there as well.
And I'm glad that you bring that up, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, we did have a 2-part episode on film festivals, as seen through the lens of Lyndon Stone, the director of the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, and a lot of what he did is he provided that insight that I think a lot of doc filmmakers don't necessarily get. We just read the film festival books, we read the press materials, we submit films blindly, and just hearing from other maybe filmmakers how the process works, but to hear from the director of a documentary, of a film festival, was extremely helpful because of the insight which you just talked about.
Oh yeah, and absolutely, and look, I mean, we're all in a position now where, you know, and unfortunately, there's some film festivals that take advantage of it, and they just want you $30 off you without a box.
Classic, right?
And so we've tried to really avoid that. We tried to really actually go, well, you know, because I think there's a lot of filmmakers that'll go like, well, if I don't get into Cannes, then it's not worth it, is it? But then it's like, but your film was never a Cannes. Like, these aren't just, you know, just because they're prestigious festivals, they still got a flavor and a tone.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that your film is right for that particular festival.
You know,
so
that's important.
You really do. You do have to look at what they program and submit wisely. Don't just like submit to 400 film festivals and waste your money.
It's easier on the soul as well if you're a bit more targeted.
So, Central Texas Barbecue, the short, happens. From there, you garner more festival nods, and then some, and then it has taken notice in such a way that it's been noticed by boards in Australia who want to perhaps fund the bigger piece barbecue. At what point did you decide that you wanted to do the bigger piece? At what point did you decide we want to do a feature film called Barbecue?
It was, you know, it was all a bit of a rush, really. Like, we were basically, one thing that happened was we teamed up with a producer, Dan Joyce, who I actually went to university with like 10 years earlier. Okay. We're both from Adelaide. He'd been really getting up a lot of projects on like broadcast and stuff like that. And, you know, we'd sort of been coming at it from the festival angle and all that. And so we sort of came together, and, you know, he had a lot of good relationships and understanding of that, I guess, that film funding side of it, these boards. And you know, you think of the film funding bodies almost like a sort of mini studio style system, in the sense that there's a couple of big organizations that you pitch your projects to. And so, you know, it came straight. It was literally
at Sydney Film Festival. So we just screened Central Texas Barbecue, and we had an informal chat with one of the documentary programmers from Screen Australia. With Dan Joyce, our producer, and she basically said, "I really, really want you to submit for this grant. You know, get yourself together and put in an application." And that's what we did. And I think a couple of months later, we'd put forward, you know, the 20-page pitch and a full A to Z budget and all the other paperwork we had to do, and from there we got shortlisted and had to do a bunch more paperwork. And then a couple of months later we got the word that we'd been selected.
But in terms of looking at what comes out of, you know, you mentioned the festival process, it means, I guess what it meant for them ticking their boxes is we've already proven we can make a couple of films. We've already proven that they can find audiences in film festivals, and, you know, and I guess, and you know, it's even as simple as like they got to see it on, you know, when we played Central Texas Barbecue, we world premiered that one at Sydney as well. And the people that eventually deciding whether they want to support us, they're watching it on a big screen with an audience as well. I mean, this is the big thing, is that, you know, film festivals are the world's best focus groups for anyone that wants to know if your film can reach an audience. Wow, so, you know, so all of these layers came in as well. So, you know, combine that with then, you know, and then Dan had the track record with doing sort of more broad, doing stuff sort of within their way of doing it. It's sort of, you know, so it meant that by the time they asked us to submit something, I think they were, you know, they had they got aware of the work in a good way, you know, in the best way possible.
It means community is what barbecue means. And there's a community of us that are still keeping it alive.
火を使ってお肉を焼くっていうのは多分人間だけなのかな。そこがなんか人の始まりかもしれないし。
Kui ингээ бөөнөрөө суугаад ингээд нэг сайхан хорох бодгоо игээд ингээ ихэд цаана амт нь хүртэл шалганд болчихдог.
That's what it is. That's a barbecue. It brings people together.
Barbecue is about barbecue culture around the world, but it's not about the food. It's about the way putting meat on fire brings people, brings communities together. So we wanted to explore it from a cultural perspective as like an act that humans do to be together rather than a cooking show.
And yet it ends up like so many documentaries, it ends up being about something so much more than that. It's about community, is it not? It's about people coming together. It's about family. It's about friendship.
Yeah, and I think that, all of those themes sort of came out of the process of making. You saw it, because it was a film that we shot in 12 countries. You obviously have to, I guess, as a storyteller, sort of try and guess where the story might go. But we tried really hard to not sort of ram a narrative down the subject's throat, just sort of like hear what they, because we're going into places that we did not know a huge amount about.
Right.
And so we just wanted to, we were more like just listening to what they say and let them identify the things that are important in their world. So in a way, this sort of survey of the world gave us a chance to sort of see, well, what is on people's minds and what are these commonalities, and the things that you described, like home, community, being a part of a global world, sort of, wanting to come together, being proud of your heritage, like sort of these elements. I think we sort of hoped in a way, we sort of joked that like this was sort of like a hypothesis that we went in hope of, and if it didn't prove, if the world is a terrible place and no one wants to get along, then we would have gone with that. But the fact that there was this sort of affirming look at the world coming out of, what at the end of the day is just regular people just chatting over a barbecue. That was those sort of, I guess, those themes that came at the end of a long journey.
And you told these stories in countries like South Africa, Japan, Armenia, Uruguay, Australia, Texas, and yes, Texas is its own country. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, well, you just ask anyone from Texas, they'll explain that to you.
Yeah, right, exactly. How did you guys decide what countries that you would be filming in? How did you narrow that down?
Yeah, well, we wanted it to be as geographically broad as possible, but we also had ideas about how certain countries would link together thematically. So we touch on, I think, nearly every continent except Antarctica.
Yeah, I think that's
right. Right.
But, things like contrasting the refugee camp, Zatari refugee camp on the border of Syria and Jordan, contrasting the story there of people who have no home with Armenia, a country where similarly over generations a lot of Armenians have been forced to leave their homes. So themes like home, themes like for us, we had to include Australia, and we had to reflect places that were important to us as well as filmmakers.
Yes.
So places like Australia, obviously. Yeah, and we also, we wanted to do some big countries that, like obviously had to figure into the barbecue story, but then we wanted to look at smaller and maybe, countries that people wouldn't necessarily be able to place on a map, ourselves included. So, we went to Uruguay instead, which is a small country as opposed to Argentina, which is a big country. And to this day, I'm still getting hate mail about that. Wow. Not including Argentina has, people are passionate.
Yeah, I don't think, and I was like, we made our first short film there, but I don't know if we're welcome back in that country.
Yeah.
That was also, it was about changing expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone was expecting this film to include Argentina, and I feel like they get enough coverage in terms of barbecue.
That's right.
So we wanted to show Uruguay, the underdog.
And I think also that, it was, we were very, very fortunate in that, when we got the funding to do this film, we were just so lucky to be able to sort of make it quite a personal story. You know, we're not in the documentary. It doesn't cut to us. We're not voiceovering it or anything like that.
Right.
It's people's story in their own words. But we, you know, part of the story of like which countries we chose, there's also just all these sort of random serendipitous moments that brought us to countries. Like when we didn't even know about barbecue in Armenia, and then we saw this little viral video about a guy talking about how Armenia's got the best barbecue, and it just sort of went, it was like a joke. It just became like a meme on Reddit. And then I found out that guy lives in Australia, reached out to him, got in touch with his daughter, and then before you knew it, we were staying with his childhood friend in Armenia who couldn't speak a word of English. So you kind of take those opportunities as they come up as well. So we just sort of booked a ticket and went. So, you know, we got a lot of it's, you know, as much as it's part of some grand conspiracy which countries we chose, there was also just this sort of random movement that applied to it.
Two of my favorite locations that you did and the stories where you shot were, I loved early on the Japan segment. Another location that I really dug, and probably because it spoke to my sort of filmic sensibilities, if you will, was Mongolia.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had never heard of this. Is it Budog or Bodog? How do you?
That's right.
Cooking from inside out. Can you describe that to us real quick? Because that blew my mind.
Oh, yeah. So this one, this is for most people wouldn't have heard of this. So basically what you do, you skin the animal, but it's very important to keep the skin in one piece without any holes in it. Yeah. Then you cut up the meat, leave it on the bone, cut it into chunks, and then the meat is placed back inside the animal's skin with boiling hot rocks. Yes. So the rocks have been heated over a fire, so they're like really, really, really hot. They get put back into the animal's skin with the meat, with some spices, and basically those hot rocks are cooking the animal by steam from the inside out. You then have to stitch up the neck hole and the whole animal blows up like a balloon, cooking with the steam, and then you have to blowtorch the fur off the outside. So you're effectively cooking it from the inside and the outside at the same time.
It's incredible. Did you guys partake in the meat from the Budog?
Of course we did. We ate everything.
Yes, of course.
I'm glad we did it. Don't necessarily need to do it again.
My wife is vegetarian. How and why should she be interested in a documentary film like Barbecue?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and we got to bounce it off a couple of people that worked in post-production on the film were vegetarians. They got one poor assistant editor who had to cut about 100 hours of this footage. Start culling.
That's so cruel of you guys.
I think it's we wanted this documentary to be a reflection of the world and the world we live in, and the reality is that this we do have this celebratory bringing together of people over meat. And I think whether you on a personal level choose to partake in it or not, there's, I definitely enjoy watching documentaries about people that don't do things the same that I do.
Yeah, you bet.
And I think there's hopefully enough of an interesting things discussed about how people come together and choose to come together over this, that it maybe it moves a bit beyond personal choices, like but it's a hard question to answer, I think.
I think like choosing whether or not you eat meat is a very first world issue, or privilege, I should say.
Sure is, right. That's right.
So it's great that we can all live in a world where we can choose whether or not we eat meat. That's fine. But I think a lot of the cultures that we show in the film don't have the luxury of that choice.
Right.
And I don't think that they should be looked down upon for that, I guess.
This film is shot. It's shot beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Carefully, dare I say, delicately, which is in stark contrast of, say, this idea of people around a grill barbecuing and just getting into cuts of meat, right? Matthew, were you the cinematographer on this as well?
Yes, I was.
Yeah,
yes.
I thought so. Tell us a little bit about your process, or maybe as well as maybe your inspirations for how you like to film this kind of work. Yeah,
it was the sort of the attitude we took is I think the last 7 or 8 years of me shooting stuff has been probably the arc a lot of us have gone through if we've shot on DSLRs, which is like I started before DSLRs came out, so I was desperately trying to chase shallow depth of field and like all of that
right
stuff of that. Then I like overdosed on it around 2009, 2010.
Oh, I'm pretty sure most of us did. Everyone did.
50 mils set to minimums and just floating in on it, all that shit. Like, and
of course.
So then I think, I don't know, but for maybe other documentary filmmakers feel a similar thing, is like if you started before the DSLR age, yeah, you were chasing it, then you had an excess of it, and then, now we're in a stage where we can do anything, right? So, like this is a documentary with a look, this sort of 35 mil look that we couldn't have done 15 years ago unless we had about $10 million of film to work with.
Yes.
So now we can do anything we want, and that's the truly liberating thing. When I think I got over the excesses of DSLR style photography and actually sat down and go like, well, how do I actually want to portray this story? And for me, it was all about avoiding some of those sort of easy traps of food porn kind of photography. Because
totally.
Like Rosie said earlier, this isn't a film about food. This is a film about people. And for me, it's always been about the interview. That's always come out of shooting that portrait mode project I told you about, where it was all about like, how do we frame, how do we get away from that like talking head right side looking to left side kind of off-camera journalism kind of look.
We had a rule that nobody would be sitting in front of a bookcase.
Yeah, we sort of had this like rule of like, no PhDs in front of bookcases, none of that sort of stuff. No, we sort of have a rule of like documentary tropes that personally we try to avoid. Like it works for certain stories, but has never worked for us. So we're like, no walking and talking and describing the things around you.
Yeah.
No sitting in front of a bookcase. So we sort of tried to strike some of that stuff out. But mainly what it was is I see this process of, now that we've got these tools of cinematography, is just like I try to borrow more from non-documentary work. And so for me, the whole idea about film is about elevating everyday situations into the cinematic. And so I think documentary's got this great opportunity to do that. Now that's very different to an obdoc observational style, truly verite, where realism is conveyed through the grittiness of the photography. For me,
absolutely.
It's all about sort of putting people up on a pedestal and making this, because the whole point of the film is that barbecue's so everyday in people's lives that they've never given it a second thought. So by putting it onto this pedestal and giving it this sort of cinematic tone, that I think sort of started elevating it into a more interesting space, I think.
That's great. And we actually recently ran an episode where sort of my segment for the show was about this idea of how to make one's documentary a bit more cinematic. And sometimes that term drives me crazy, but we all know what we mean when we say cinematic.
Yeah, and I think it's more than just production value, it's more than just chucking it on a crane or like doing stuff like that. For me, it was, like it's funny that most of my film inspirations aren't from documentary. They're from like 60s and 70s classic cinema and European cinema, Asian cinema and stuff like that. So, like you'd be strangely doing a shot in Sweden, and it would be like, that's a very Fellini shot. Do more, like you're sort of vibing it that way. I think recently it's been like you've been stuck between either being super verite or being imitative of grand cinema.
That's right.
I think whole new models will come out of it where people will actually do all sorts of interesting things now that they have all the tools. But we're very new. It's all very new.
It doesn't have to be complicated either. We didn't use a single light on the entire shoot. We didn't use any lights. We had a camera and a tripod. That's it.
Camera and a tripod. We didn't have any.
It's not like we were using cranes or drones or anything like that. It was incredibly simple what we did.
And that came out of a need to because we knew it was going to be just the two of us. We didn't even have anyone assisting us. We were shooting it in 4K, which made it a little bit more difficult. And basically, we just didn't want, I guess, we just didn't want the technology to get in the way of a story. So we sort of gave ourselves some sort of limits on the equipment we were going to take out there.
As we wrap this conversation up, tell us how we can see Barbecue. There's more distribution happening, is there not?
Yeah, well, it's out on Netflix worldwide as of last week.
Exactly. So exciting. So exciting.
Thank you. Yeah. So, just came out last Tuesday, which is great. And that's across all like Netflix all around the world.
Platforms,
So
right.
yeah.
and then if you don't have Netflix, all the usual stops like iTunes, Google Play,
Amazon.
Vimeos, all of them. Yeah. But yeah.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
and that's the great. Just quickly, that's a
Yes.
great thing. Is, you know, as you know, when we made this film, it was a global film, but we never quite knew how we were going to reach a. We wanted to send it out to a global audience, obviously, as well. And so, you know, just getting it onto Netflix is just, you know, for it to be able to drop in a day to 100 million subscribers in, I don't know, 100 and something countries is pretty exciting.
Wow. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have met you guys. Thank you so much for being on the show, and let's have you on again. Yeah, thank you guys.
Oh,
Thank you
absolutely.
so
Anytime.
much for having us. It was fun.
Hey, can I ask a quick favor? If you found this podcast helpful in living your doc life or making your doc film, will you help us share it with more people by giving us a stellar review on whichever platform you use to listen to this podcast? We'd really appreciate it, and you'll be helping the doc filmmaking community find us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.